Hello and welcome to People and Profit. I'm Charles Pellegrin. Coming up, we'll look at the cold, hard facts when it comes to China-Africa. What does 22 years worth of data tell us about the nature of the economic relationship between Beijing and the African continent? And China's cosmetics industry is increasingly catering to the needs of men. We'll meet the people and the companies that are turning male skincare routines into big business. And from zero to infinity, France develops a scoring system to rank the environmental impact of items of clothing. The higher the score, the worse the damage. Well, so much ink has been spilled trying to define the relationship between Africa and China. Narratives describing a relationship of neo-colonialism face off with competing narratives straining to highlight an equal partnership of win-win cooperation. But what does the data actually say? Boston University's Global Development Policy Center and the Africa Research Consortium have pored over the economic data from 2000 to 2022 to try to get a better grasp of what defines economic engagement between the African continent and China. Trade between the two surged from just over $11.5 billion in 2000 to over $257 billion in 2022. And looking at the nature of what was being traded, it would appear that largely Africa exchanged primary resources for finished goods. Over that same period, 89% of all African exports to China were of primary resources, and 94% of all Chinese exports to Africa were of manufactured goods. Well, to help us sort through all the results of that report, let's speak with Oyintarelado Moses, who is a data analyst and a database manager at the Global China Initiative at Boston University, and one of the authors of the report. Tarela, thank you so much for being with us. It's common for African governments to say they want to export more finished goods or agricultural goods to China, things that require more value added. Does the data show any positive evolution in that regard?
Well, thank you for having me. And in recent years, such as from the 2021 to 2022 period, we do see an increase of manufactured goods over that time span. However, the value of those goods is nowhere near the levels of the extractive sectors that we're seeing of many of these commodities that tend to be crude oil, iron, aluminum, and copper that are being exported from African countries to China.
And what happens if we look at all that data without some of the huge outliers, countries like Angola or South Africa, who really are the biggest exporters to China? What picture do we have then?
Well, again, it does still end up being mostly extracted commodities. And so, again, it tends to, when we look at crude oil from various countries, it's not just those dominant countries that we're seeing this type of trade come from, but also smaller nations as well. And so there really isn't, when you take out some of these countries that tend to export in such large amounts, you still see that same basic trend and less of diversification that we would hope to see in the future.
Mm-hmm. In the report, you also look at development finance flows over that same period. $170 billion of loans from Chinese lenders to African governments. What does the data tell us about China's role as a source of financing?
Well, it does show us that this financing has largely been to infrastructure related sectors. So when we look at the sector distribution, we do see about that the $170 billion of those loans largely goes to energy, transport, and telecommunications. And in terms of the impact of that financing, we have seen that African countries have perceived economic benefits from that financing in terms of increase of access to infrastructure. At the same time, they have also encountered risks related to the environment, such as the impact on air pollution, as well as the negative impacts on biodiversity as well.
And what kind of energy projects are these as this development finance actually going towards?
Yes, so of the energy loans that we have tracked, 51% of those loans are going to fossil fuel related energy projects, gas, oil, and coal projects that are both extractive in nature, meaning that some of those energy sources are being extracted and exported back to China, but also are electrifying in nature, meaning that it is adding to African countries' energy access. In addition to that 51%, 30% has been going to hydropower projects, mostly for the purpose of electrification. And unfortunately, a mere 2% has gone to renewable energy projects, specifically solar and wind projects.
There's a huge untapped potential there. It's too bad in Africa. We're going to move on to a different topic you cover in the report, which is debt. This is a fairly contentious topic. We regularly hear Western diplomats and politicians talk about a debt trap for African governments who take on loans from China. What does your research actually say about this narrative?
Sure. So our research does show that this increase of loan commitments that we've seen to the region has led to an increase in external debt owed back to China. And so we see 11% of overall African countries' external debt really being owed to China. Especially for these borrowers that have extended to be the top borrowers of Chinese finance. So these include Angola, Kenya, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and Zambia. However, when we pull back and look at the big picture of external debt levels, we do see that, it's not just China that has contributed to these external debt levels, but bondholders hold about 28% of this debt. The World Bank holds about 11%, so very similar to China. And there are other multilateral lenders, such as the African Development Bank as well, that are kind of involved in these top 10 creditors for African countries.
Oyintarelado Moses is a data analyst and database manager at the Global China Initiative at Boston University. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's stay on the topic of China now, where sales for men's makeup sets have increased 27-fold over the past year on China's Douyin social media platform. It's equivalent to TikTok. The trend shows no sign of abating, despite Beijing's crackdown on what censors there call sissy men and other abnormal aesthetics. Millennials and Gen Z men are those showing the most interest, benefiting the wider beauty industry, as our correspondents in China, Yana Li and Jasmine Ling, explain.
Every morning, 32-year-old Meng Yueming starts his day with a 4-step skincare routine.
After washing my face, I usually put on some simple lotion and then apply a vitamin serum. And finally, I put on some sunscreen. It's rather simple.
The fashion designer started to take care of his skin at university.
Good skin can actually improve my mental state and even your aura. Nowadays, more Chinese men care about their image, and I think it's a general thing. Not just about skin, but also what they wear.
Chinese men are increasingly interested in looking good. According to short video platform Douyin, sales for makeup marketed for men jumped 27-fold year-on-year during a March discount event. To cater to this growing customer base, Wang Ruibin helped launch Refresh in 2019. Their best seller is a cleansing foam.
Let me show you. It's a foamy texture which is very mild and doesn't hurt the skin.
The men's skincare brand raked in over 230 million euros in sales in 2023, growing 40% in just 1 year.
Our current customer base is mostly 18 to 30-year-olds. But the skincare habits you develop when you're young will stay with you the rest of your life. So with this demographic, and with time, China's male skincare market has much potential.
One research company estimates that China's male skincare market could be worth 2.6 billion euros by 2026.
And here in France, players in the clothing sector, whether they're brands, associations, or manufacturers, are currently sharing their thoughts with the government on a new scoring system to assess the environmental impact of clothes. Ahead of a formal decree in May and implementation in the fall. Camille Knight and our colleagues from France 2 talk us through the new point system.
It's another attempt from the French government to clamp down on the fast fashion industry. This time, it's in the form of a so-called eco-score, a way of labelling the environmental impact of a piece of clothing.
There's a lot of waste, so I think we should try to limit the damage a little, you know.
The idea is to provide consumers with a snapshot of an item's ecological footprint to incite them to be more conscious about what they buy. The score will be generated using a combination of factors, including composition, the country it was made in, durability, water consumption, the use of pesticides, and the volumes of production. The higher the score, the more impact it has on the environment. Some brands are already one step ahead. This creator has already come up with a QR code which makes the clothes traceable.
Here you can trace the origin of the material. So, for example, here the yarn comes from Australia. It was important for us to give our customers this information. It's our job to educate consumers so that they really understand what is behind a piece of clothing.
In France, people are buying 30% more clothes than they were a decade ago. In 2016, the textile industry represented 8% of CO2 emissions, and the French government fears that could rise to 25% in the next 20 years. But many in the industry are critical of France's labelling idea, pointing to the nuances involved for each criteria and the impossibility of combining all factors into a single score. The measure will be implemented on a voluntary basis starting this autumn, but could become compulsory in 2025.
Well, that's all for this week. You can watch all of our previous shows by searching for People and Profit on the France 24 app or website, or on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on social media. In the meantime, thank you for watching and stay tuned.